All right, well, I'd like to start by thanking everyone for coming to the session and thank the organizers and the moderator. A conference like this is incredibly difficult to organize and get everything to happen. And boy, what a success we have this year, right? We have people from all over the world, different walks, different perspectives, and that's the reason we have these conferences. So I think it's going to be fantastic. So far, I've met lots of great people. This is my 7th time coming to India, and I've never seen anything like this. So this is really great. Now I look forward to seeing anyone at AIPLA annual meeting in Washington, D.C. If you happen to go to that, I go to that every year, and then we can kind of exchange information that way. But anyway, on to the topic, which is peculiarities of software patent prosecution. Now, I was asked to put together something on software, so I did that, and now I'm being asked to also make it have some international relevance, and that's easy, right? Because we file patent applications all over the place. There's this idea now about the so-called global patent application, as was talked about, filing in PCT, what have you. And so it's easy to talk about the international aspects. Now, I give 2 different kinds of presentations. I give sort of a deep dive, which is like going into one particular topic and trying to educate the audience, and I love doing those things, but we really don't have time to do a deep dive today. So I'm going to go the other way with this and actually cover a whole bunch of different things, sort of almost like an issue spotting type situation, where I'll just sort of name things off. And these are things that not only have I encountered, but others have encountered, and so there's a little bit of resonance on these topics. When I go to IP cells, I go to law firms, I talk about these topics, and when I look at their faces, they're all smiling at me because they have the same problems. So let's talk about these things and see how we can move forward to best address them. My presentation is licensed under Creative Commons, so you can make copies. I don't have any problem with that. Then we'll talk a little bit about why we care about these peculiarities, and then we'll look at the peculiarities themselves, and we'll keep an international flavor on it. First, why do we care? Well, with this audience, I don't really need to talk too much about why we care. We're all professionals. We want to do a good job. We're expected to know. Right? So when someone comes to us and asks us, can I get a patent on software, we need to have a good answer for that. Right? And so that's part of what we'll be talking about today. Oftentimes, like I said, I'm giving this presentation to an IB cell, or I'm giving it to some corporates, or I'm giving it to some law firm, and they may not be concerned with software. But I think with this group here, you already kind of know, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, so we'll just move right past this. The peculiarities, the first one, of course, is subject matter patentability, which in the U.S. is Section 101, also called industrial applicability. Every jurisdiction has something to say about this issue. I put it first because we could spend 4 hours talking about it, and we still wouldn't make any progress. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put it first, talk about it, get it out of the way, and then move on to other things. Because unfortunately, what happens oftentimes when we talk about software is that's all we talk about. And that's fine for a philosophical debate, but we're practitioners, and we need to know what to do. So I move on to some of the other issues, such as infringement. And that's important. I think someone rightly said in just the last session, it was an accountant. And he said the value of a patent is determined by what infringes it. And if you're not careful in software, you can have a problem with that. So we'll look at that. Difficult or specialized technologies. In software, we get these genius people who have these very complicated inventions. We'll talk about that. Then the other problem, which is what I call back-of-the-napkin disclosures. These are very brief disclosures that we sometimes get in the software arena. And then what I call do-it-yourself semantics. This is where inventors invent words. Okay? They like to invent technologies. They also like to invent words. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how does that impact things. And then, of course, international filings. And we'll focus on some of that. And I'll try to put an international flavor on each of these slides. So let's talk with this one. This is subject matter patentability. A lot of this is high visibility because of the so-called T word, right, which I won't use, but there's one on the screen for you to see what they look like. This is sort of the public perception of software patents is that you can't get a patent on software, it's a bad thing, and so we need to have an answer for that. And so typically it's misunderstood. As soon as we walk into the room and we start talking about software patents, people misunderstand it. As was rightly said, it's impossible to get a patent on software as such. It's impossible in the United States to get a patent on software, per se. But we get what I think is a better term, which is used in India, which is the computer-related inventions. okay? It's not on the software itself. It's on some kind of a method, it's on a system, it's on a computer-readable medium, different places. So, and what happens oftentimes is that folks overlook these things in their IP cells, in the corporates, whatever they're looking, they may have inventions and they don't even know they have them because they've been told you can't get a patent on software. I talked to the woman who invented the mouse. I was doing some prior art searching, and we were being sued by someone who said they had invented right-clicking for this particular purpose. So I found the woman who invented the mouse, and I asked her, I said, why didn't you get a patent on any of this Windows interface and the right-clicking and the left-clicking? And she said, our patent attorneys told us we couldn't get a patent on it. So they ended up getting industrial designs on some of the icons, but they never got a patent on the software. So you can see, and maybe that's a good thing, right? Because we don't have any patents blocking us on all of that. But from the company's standpoint, they probably should have filed some patent applications on that. They would have had to have creative attorneys because this can be fatal if not handled correctly. If you try to claim just the software, you can be in trouble. But the reality is, in the United States, it's typically pretty easy to address this. We actually have boilerplate that we put at the end of our applications that bring them within the realm of patentability, typically. You might need to do a little bit more, but it's not that hard. Whereas in India, I understand it's harder than that. And there is a strong bias against business methods, meaning that if a client comes to me with a business method, I typically tell them, look, you are going to have trouble. You're not going to get it in Europe, you're not going to get it in India, and you're probably going to have trouble in the United States. So we morph whatever business method technology they give us, we morph it into a computer thing, okay? If they tell us X, Y, and Z, we say, well, how would that work in a computer? And then we try to make it so it's actually covered by some cute computer technique. The law continues to be in flux, and it probably will be. When I graduated from law school in 1996, I was told that there wouldn't be software patents. Well, there aren't really software patents, but I've been a software patent attorney now for 15 years, so we don't know where it's going, but it seems like it's active. Infringement, I won't spend a lot of time on this other than just to identify the issues. We have a multiple actors jurisprudence in the United States under the Akamai case, which will now be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court this year. That case says, essentially, best practice is you want to have the steps in a method claim performed by one actor. Okay? In computers, you have client, you have server, you have device, you have cloud. You could have 3, 4 actors. You want the claim to cover one actor. Okay? So that's sort of what I'll say on that. And then infringement by users. You typically don't want to have infringement by users, but maybe it's your only choice. Why not want to have infringement by users? Why not want to write the claim so that it covers a user? Because if you have to sue the user, that's probably your customer. Because if you're looking at Apple wanting to sue people using something the others could be using. So you have to sort of think about that. You don't want to really have the claims to cover the user. Sometimes you do, but it's just a consideration. I don't have clear answers, but I can tell you that that's a consideration. ITC. In the US, there's sort of a bias toward a system claim because that's something that's coming in, by shipment that you can stop at the border. So for instance, if Apple has a patent, do they have a patent on the software method? Do they have a patent, or would they rather have a patent on the phone? They'd rather have the patent on the phone in that case, so the claim covers the phone so that they can stop it as it's coming into the border. These are challenging. If it's not difficult, you're not doing it right. Because what people do now is they download the apps. They buy the phone, then they download the app. So how do you cover that? You might use a computer-readable medium claim, you might use a method claim, different ways. And all of this, we would like to write 10, 20, 30 independent claims. We only get 3 independent claims in the United States. Unless you want to pay a lot of money, you only get 3 independent claims. So you better be creative with those 3 independent claims. And then the other thing is detectability. When I first started drafting patent applications in the software field, it was on object-oriented technologies, different ways of software development tools, all this complicated stuff. I had a degree in computer science, so they're like, give it to this guy, he can do it. So I'm doing all these things, I'm writing these, but they're very complicated. We're looking at 10, 15, 20,000 US dollars to write one of these applications. Then you get it in front of the examiner. The examiner can't understand it, right? Because it's so complicated. So it takes lots of effort to get it through the patent office. Now you've spent 20, 30, 40,000 US dollars on this patent. You now have a patent and you celebrate, except that nobody in the world can tell if you infringe or not because it's not detectable. It's either in cloud, or it's so complicated you can't figure it out. It's, on a server somewhere. What value has been provided to the client? So if you're doing software patents in any arena, you want to focus on that detectability. Curiously enough now, some clients and some of our competitors are using open source. And if they publish their source code, maybe you can look at their source code and you can tell if they're infringing or not. So that's another issue that comes up. Difficult or specialized technologies. Everyone wants attorneys with experience in their area, right? Somebody comes to you and they want to do something on quantum computing. They don't want you asking, what is quantum computing? They want you to know what quantum computing is. So that's sort of expected that we have that background. We'll speak the inventor's language. We can, we know the terminology that's in there. But inventors oftentimes live in a technology bubble, right? They've been doing quantum computing since they were 10 years old. And so it's difficult for them to communicate to you. And as was said in another session, writing that specification to have some good description in it, whether it be in India, US, or Europe, you want to have a good solid description of that technology in there. And so how do you do that? Well, one of the things we do in computer science is we use what's called a data flow diagram. This is every software has information coming in, some kind of processing, and information going out. And if you can agree with the inventor on what that is, then you have a start. I have had 150 pages of information sent at me, and I can't figure out what it's doing. This is one way when you have a difficult technology to figure out where to go. And then the next challenge is knowing your competitors' technologies. So certainly if you're doing international, you may want to know what the folks are in the jurisdiction, what they call it, what they're doing. For example, if you're filing an application for Microsoft, you don't want claims covering a registry, because a registry is only on the Windows operating system. And you don't want the claim to cover the Windows operating system because that's your client's product. You want the claim to cover maybe Apple or some other, could be Android, whatever operating system that you're going after. The other sort of other extreme is this sort of back of the napkin disclosures. This is where somebody sits down over lunch and comes up with an idea and then submits it to the IP cell, and the patent review committee looks at it and says, wait a second, what is this? This is short. But then it's decided, this is actually great. We want to go ahead and get a patent on this. Well, this is a challenge, right? Because again, going back to that specification, you want to have lots of description. Now, the only real way to knock something like this out is to do a search, right, and knock it out so that you can tell your client that there's no way you're going to get a patent on this. But sometimes we get answer of, we want a patent anyway. We want to cover it. We want to cover our product because we have a licensing deal. Or we want to create some prior art here, file something. So then that's part of what we do. And so we are then go back to the inventor, typically ask them for more information, show us some use cases, show us a trace of the execution, or what have you. And then do-it-yourself semantics. Now this is when inventors make up terms, right? They do this all the time because what is software? Ones and zeros, right? That's all it is at the end of the day. The next level of abstraction up would be maybe assembling language, adding this together, moving this data around. But that doesn't sound so good, so then they start making up terms. I had an inventor one time who said, this is a widget. And widgets can do this, and widgets can do that, and widgets, but you're not going to be able to get a patent on a widget, right? I need to tell the examiner what the widget does. It was some user interface thing, and you could click here and it does this and click there. So then I had to go back to the inventor and say, well, what happens when I click here? What happens when I click there? So I put all that in there. Otherwise, it's sort of impossible to work with. You can't search it. It doesn't really have any depth to it. But by the same token, do we patent practitioners make up words? Yes, we make up words all the time to try to broaden out whatever the inventor has come up with. So an inventor may come up with this thing, and we end up calling it an error handling engine or something like that. Does that mean you pour petrol into the engine? No. This is a computer thing, right? This is what they call it. So at some point, we do make up terms. That's part of what we do. In fact, that's a large part of what we software patent attorneys do, is we come up with the semantics to describe what something is. Instead of, and if you're not in computers, right, you do this, right? Instead of calling it a motorcycle, you call it a two-wheeled vehicle. Well, we're doing sort of the same thing in the software field. And this has led to, there's this BioSig case now, it's been taken by the US Supreme Court to address the concept of indefiniteness. these terms, what do all these terms mean? So the Supreme Court is now taking a look at that and deciding, what level of scrutiny should be taken for that. And then lastly, and actually hit squarely onto the topic that we're talking about today, which is international filings. So all that stuff went by very quickly, right? But now what happens when, as was said earlier, client comes to you and says, I want global patent application. And our clients want these now. They want an application that they can file PCT, and they can go into India, they can go into Europe, they can go into Australia, Japan, US, China. These folks all have different rules, and the most notable one, of course, is patent subject matter differs, right? In the US, it's sort of very large patentable subject matter, okay? In Europe, maybe it's a little less, or you have technical effect. And then India, it's actually smaller. There's something there, you just need an attorney who knows what's going on, and it needs to be described in something other than functional language, right? As I understand it, and I'm not an Indian attorney, but as I understand it, you can't just have method steps in India. That won't work. If it's a computer doing method steps, that won't work, because it'll be called unpatentable subject matter. And if you just morph that into a system saying a computer doing these steps, that doesn't help you. You need to have a real system that's doing something, pieces that are somehow working together, like a database over here or something, but it still has to be patentable. So when we're drafting applications, we want to have something that has the method, but also has a system in it. You should have a method drawing, a system drawing, method claim, drawing, system claim. And some claims in the United States, for example, we have what's called a Beauregard claim, which is a computer-readable medium claim. And you can't even get those in India. They're just not allowed. But if you're drafting an application in India that you know will be filed in the United States, you should include both the Beauregard claims and the support for those claims in your specification, so that when that application is filed, and I believe Europe also has a similar type of situation, you can get those claims. Because remember when we were talking about covering all the different actors and on the infringement, the Beauregard claim can be an amazing claim for providing an infringement case, because anyone who makes, uses, or sells that computer-readable medium, which could be a CD-ROM or even a device, a computer or a phone that has it in it, that's an infringer. So you can be an infringer simply by buying the product. You don't have to perform the method. So that's sort of that. Claim strategies conflict across different jurisdictions. In the United States, best practice is picture claim, a narrow claim that covers a commercial embodiment. And you want to have that because it speeds along prosecution and encourages agreement with the examiner. Well, you might not want to do that in other jurisdictions. For example, the person here talking about EPO practice can correct me on this if I'm wrong. But I don't think you want to have a narrow independent claim in a European filing, because then you're sort of saying that your invention is limited to that narrow claim. So now you have different claim sets that you want to have in different jurisdictions, right? Because India isn't going to take this claim, Europe, this isn't a good idea, United States wants this. So what do? We actually draft claim sets for different jurisdictions, but we try to keep the work down to a minimum. You can't sit down and write a whole bunch of different claim sets for all the different jurisdictions. So one practice is we draft for the US and we draft for Europe, for example. We do something like that. And then, of course, the number of claims. In the US, you have 20. In Europe, you probably don't want to have 20. In India, you probably don't want to have 20. And then to top all this off, another international aspect of this is the export control. We have clients who work on inventions that they're not allowed to send out of the country, because the United States prevents that because of some export control laws. This isn't foreign filing license. This is a different issue. And so that's something to also be aware of. If you're dealing with technology, something as innocent as sending an email can be a violation of export control. If you have a software invention and you send the email off to someone to have them prepare the application, that can be a problem. So with all that and covering that so quickly, I appreciate your attention and your patience with me as I went through all those different issues. Hopefully at least one or two of those made some sort of resonance with you. You've seen the issue before, and if not, maybe when you do see the issue, you will recognize that it even is an issue. Because part of the battle with us is just even recognizing that there is an issue. So thank you for your attention, and I would like to say we live in very interesting times.
Thank you, Mr.